They found her standing in his study at 6:47 in the morning, holding a document she was never supposed to see. Her hands were shaking. The paper slipped from her fingers and floated to the hardwood floor like a feather carrying the weight of 1,000 secrets. In that moment, everything changed. What she discovered that morning would destroy a marriage, expose a billionaire's deepest fear, and prove that sometimes the people we trust least are the ones who save us. This is a story about Jonathan Hale, a man who built an empire worth $3 billion but couldn't buy the one thing he desperately needed: trust. It's about his wife, Clarissa, a woman who had everything except the thing she wanted most: to feel seen. And it's about Mara, a quiet housekeeper from Ghana who never imagined she'd become the keeper of a secret that would tear apart one of America's wealthiest families. What happened in that mansion over the course of 6 weeks wasn't just about money or betrayal. It was about the invisible tests we give the people we love, and what happens when they fail. This story is true. The names have been changed, but every word of what you're about to hear actually happened. Jonathan Hale didn't grow up rich. He was born in a 2-bedroom apartment in Newark, New Jersey, the son of a factory worker and a schoolteacher. By the time he was 35, he'd built a software company that revolutionized supply chain management. By 40, he'd sold it for $800 million. By 50, he'd multiplied that fortune through investments, real estate, and venture capital. But money taught Jonathan a cruel lesson. The more he had, the less he could trust anyone around him. His business partner stole from him. His brother sued him. 3 of his closest friends tried to manipulate him into bad deals. So Jonathan developed a system. He tested people. Not obviously, not cruelly, but constantly. He'd leave cash on his desk to see if his assistant would take it. He'd tell different versions of the same story to different people to see who leaked information. He measured loyalty like other people measured profit margins. It was exhausting. It was lonely, but it kept him safe. Clarissa entered his life 7 years ago at a charity gala in Manhattan. She was 32, beautiful in that effortless way that made other women jealous, and she worked as an art consultant for wealthy collectors. She didn't need Jonathan's money. She had her own career, her own apartment, her own life. That's what attracted him. She seemed immune to his wealth. They married after a year of dating. For the first 2 years, they were happy. Jonathan relaxed. He laughed more. He even took vacations. But then the old patterns returned. He worked 16-hour days. He traveled constantly. He checked his phone during dinner. And Clarissa, slowly, quietly, began to disappear inside their marriage. She stopped planning date nights. She stopped asking about his day. She filled her calendar with yoga classes, gallery openings, and long lunches with friends he'd never met. They lived in the same house but existed in different worlds. Jonathan noticed. Of course he noticed. But instead of talking to her, instead of being vulnerable, he did what he always did. He tested her. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Mara Osei was hired 3 months before everything fell apart. She was 41 years old, a widow, and the mother of a 14-year-old son named Kwame. She'd moved to the United States from Accra 5 years earlier, working as a home health aide before transitioning to private housekeeping. The agency that placed her described her as reliable, discreet, and thorough. Jonathan barely spoke to her during the interview. He asked 3 questions, checked her references, and hired her on the spot. Mara was grateful for the job. The Hale estate paid twice what she'd been making, and the hours were predictable. She arrived at 7 in the morning and left by 3 in the afternoon, giving her time to pick up Kwame from school. She cleaned the kitchen, the guest rooms, the hallways. She did laundry, organized closets, and polished silver that never got used. She was invisible in the way good household staff are supposed to be invisible. But Mara noticed things. She noticed that Jonathan ate breakfast alone every morning, reading the Wall Street Journal in silence. She noticed that Clarissa slept until 10 and spent most afternoons on the phone, speaking in hushed tones that stopped whenever Mara entered the room. She noticed that they rarely ate dinner together. When they did, The silence between them felt heavy, like humidity before a storm. Mara never commented. It wasn't her place. She simply did her job and tried not to get involved in the quiet sadness that filled that enormous house. It happened on a Sunday morning in late September. Jonathan was traveling for business. Clarissa had left early for a spa appointment in the city. Mara was alone in the house, working through her weekly checklist. She normally avoided Jonathan's private study. He'd made it clear during her first week that the room was off limits. But that morning, she noticed the door was slightly open. She hesitated. Then she remembered he'd specifically asked her the night before to dust the bookshelves. He'd left a note on the kitchen counter. So she went in. The study smelled like leather and old books. One wall was floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the estate's gardens. Another was lined with first editions and business biographies. Jonathan's desk sat in the center, massive and mahogany, covered with neat stacks of documents and 3 computer monitors. Mara dusted carefully. She touched nothing on the desk. But when she reached up to clean the top shelf, her elbow knocked against a leather-bound notebook. It tumbled down, hit the edge of the desk, and fell open on the floor. She bent to pick it up. That's when she saw it. The document was handwritten in Jonathan's precise script. At the top, it said, "Final Testament and Distribution of Assets, Private Copy." Her breath caught. She knew she shouldn't read it. Every instinct told her to close the notebook and put it back. But her eyes had already found the words that would change everything. "In the event of my death, my wife, Clarissa Hale, will receive a one-time payment of $500,000 and no further claim to any assets, properties, or business interests. The entirety of my estate, valued at approximately $3.2 billion, will be transferred to the Hale Foundation for Educational Initiatives in Underserved Communities." Mara's hands started shaking. This wasn't just a will. This was a statement. Jonathan was leaving his wife almost nothing. She read further. There was a clause explaining his reasoning. "I have provided for Clarissa during our marriage. If she truly loved me, she would not need my money after my death. If she does not truly love me, she does not deserve it." The words were cold, clinical, devastating. Mara heard footsteps in the hallway. She slammed the notebook shut and shoved it back on the shelf, her heart hammering. Clarissa appeared in the doorway. She was supposed to be gone for hours. "Mara, what are you doing in here?" Her voice wasn't angry, just curious. Mara's mouth went dry. "Mr. Hale asked me to dust the shelves. I'm sorry, I left the door open. I was just finishing." Clarissa walked into the room. She was wearing expensive athleisure, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, her face free of makeup. She looked younger, softer, tired. "It's fine. I came back early. My appointment got cancelled." She glanced at the bookshelf, then at Mara's face. "Are you okay? You look pale." Mara forced a smile. "I'm fine, just a little warm. I'll finish up and get out of your way." But Clarissa was already looking at the shelf. Her eyes landed on the leather notebook, slightly out of place, pushed in at an angle. She reached for it. Time seemed to slow down. Mara watched as Clarissa pulled the notebook down, opened it and began to read. The color drained from her face. Her lips parted. Her hand went to her throat. "Oh my God!" she whispered. Then again louder. "Oh my God!" She looked at Mara. "Did you read this?" Mara wanted to lie, but something in Clarissa's eyes, something desperate and broken, made her tell the truth. "I knocked it down by accident. I saw some of it. I'm so sorry. I wasn't trying to." Clarissa cut her off. $500,000. After 7 years of marriage. That's what I'm worth to him. She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was sharp and jagged. "He's leaving billions to charity and giving me the price of a nice apartment." Mara should have left. She should have excused herself, finished her cleaning, and pretended this never happened. But Clarissa started crying. Not delicate tears. Real, gut-wrenching sobs that made her whole body shake. She sank into Jonathan's desk chair and buried her face in her hands. Mara stood there, frozen, unsure what to do. Finally, she walked over and gently touched Clarissa's shoulder. Mrs. Hale, maybe there's an explanation. Maybe you should talk to him. Clarissa looked up, her eyes red and swollen. Talk to him? About what? About how he's been planning for my life after his death and decided I don't deserve anything. About how he clearly thinks I'm some kind of gold digger. She wiped her face roughly. I never cared about his money, Mara. Never. I married him because I loved him. Because he made me laugh. Because I thought we'd build a life together. Her voice broke. But somewhere along the way he stopped seeing me. I became part of the furniture in this house. Just another thing he owned. Over the next hour, Clarissa talked, and Mara listened. Clarissa told her about the loneliness. About the nights she'd wait up for Jonathan, only to have him come home at midnight and go straight to his office. About the vacations he'd cancel. About the way he'd check his phone during the rare conversations they did have. She told Mara about the therapist she'd begged him to see with her, the one he attended twice before saying he was too busy. She told her about the friends who'd slowly stopped inviting her to things because she was always alone, always making excuses for why her husband couldn't come. I stayed because I kept thinking it would get better, Clarissa said quietly. I kept thinking he'd remember why he married me. But now I know the truth. He never trusted me at all. Mara didn't know what to say. She was a housekeeper. This wasn't her world. These weren't her problems. But sitting there, listening to this beautiful, wealthy woman fall apart, Mara felt something unexpected. Compassion. Clarissa wasn't a villain. She was just someone who'd gotten lost in her own marriage. What are you going to do? Mara asked quietly. Clarissa stared at the document. I don't know. But I can't pretend I didn't see this. I can't pretend everything is fine. She looked at Mara. Will you promise me something? Don't tell Jonathan about this. Not yet. I need time to think. Mara hesitated. She didn't want to be in the middle of this. But what choice did she have? I won't say anything, she promised. It was a promise she'd come to regret. Over the next 2 weeks, everything changed. Clarissa became obsessed with the document. She talked about it constantly, whenever she and Mara were alone. She analyzed every word, every clause, trying to understand Jonathan's reasoning. She went from hurt to angry to devastated and back again in the span of hours. Mara tried to stay neutral. She listened when Clarissa needed to talk. She made tea. She offered tissues. But inside, she felt increasingly uncomfortable. This wasn't her marriage. These weren't her secrets. One afternoon, Clarissa showed Mara her phone. She'd started recording videos, just short clips of herself, sitting in her car or in the guest bedroom, talking about her marriage, talking about the will, talking about Jonathan's lack of trust. I'm not going to post these anywhere, Clarissa said. I just need to get my thoughts out. It helps me process. But 3 days later, Mara was cleaning the living room when her own phone buzzed. It was a notification from a social media platform she barely used. Clarissa had tagged her in a post. Mara's stomach dropped. She opened the app. Clarissa had created an account under a pseudonym. The first video was already up. In it, Clarissa sat in soft lighting, looking directly at the camera. What do you do when you discover the person you love doesn't trust you? She asked. What do you do when you find out your husband has planned your entire future without you? And in his plan, you're worth almost nothing. The video had 3,000 views. The comments were brutal. Some people called Jonathan controlling. Others called Clarissa entitled. Some suggested she was lying for attention. But the views kept climbing. Mara felt sick. She hadn't agreed to be part of this. She hadn't asked to be involved. That evening, when Jonathan came home, Mara was still there, finishing the dinner preparation. He walked into the kitchen, loosening his tie, and smiled at her. Mara, thank you. The house looks great as always. She nodded, not trusting her voice. He poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. Can I ask you something? Her heart stopped. Of course, Mr. Hale. Have you noticed anything different about Clarissa lately? She seems distant. More so than usual. Mara's mind raced. This was her moment. She could tell him everything. About the document. About the videos. About how his test had already blown up in his face. But she'd promised Clarissa. And despite everything, she felt loyal to that promise. She seems a little stressed, Mara said carefully. But I think she's okay. Jonathan studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded. Thank you, Mara. I appreciate your honesty. The irony of his words nearly made her laugh. 3 weeks after Mara found the document, Jonathan called her into his study. It was 8 o'clock at night. She'd been about to leave. Her son was waiting for her at home. But Jonathan's voice on the intercom had been firm. Not angry, just firm. She walked into the study with her heart pounding. Jonathan sat behind his desk, his laptop open in front of him. He gestured to the chair across from him. Sit down, please. She sat. Her hands were trembling, so she folded them in her lap. Jonathan turned the laptop around so she could see the screen. It was Clarissa's social media account. The videos. All of them. He'd found everything. I need you to tell me the truth, he said quietly. How long have you known about this? Mara's throat closed. She couldn't speak. Jonathan's face was unreadable. Not angry, not hurt, just calm. Too calm. I found the document, she whispered. By accident. Almost a month ago. Mrs. Hale saw me with it. She was upset. She asked me not to tell you. Jonathan nodded slowly. And the videos? Did you know she was posting them? Mara shook her head. Not at first. She showed me she was recording them, but she said they were private. Just for herself. I didn't know she'd made them public until she tagged me. Silence filled the room. Mara could hear her own heartbeat. Then Jonathan did something she didn't expect. He smiled. Not a happy smile. A sad one. Mara, he said gently. I need to tell you something. That document you found? I left it there on purpose. The room seemed to tilt. What? Mara breathed. Jonathan leaned back in his chair. I planted it. I wanted someone to find it. I wanted to see what would happen. Who would tell me? Who wouldn't? How Clarissa would react if she ever learned about it. He rubbed his face, suddenly looking exhausted. I've tested everyone in my life, Mara. Business partners, friends, family. I needed to know if my wife loved me or for my money. So I created a fake will. I left it somewhere it could be found. And I waited. Mara felt like she couldn't breathe. But that's... Why would you do that? Because I needed to know, Jonathan said simply. And now I do. He turned the laptop back around and clicked through the videos. Clarissa didn't come to me. She didn't ask me about the will. She didn't try to understand my reasoning. Instead, she went online. She made me the villain in her story. She turned our marriage into content for strangers. He closed the laptop. She failed, Mara. Not because she was upset. Not because she felt hurt. But because instead of trusting me enough to talk to me, she chose to humiliate me publicly. Mara felt tears burning her eyes. Mr. Hale, this isn't fair. You set a trap. I set a test, he corrected quietly. And you passed. He looked at her directly. You kept her confidence even though it put you in an impossible position. You stayed loyal to your word. You didn't gossip or spread rumors. You just did your job and tried to be kind. That's why you're still sitting here. Mara realized what he meant. You're firing her? I'm divorcing her, Jonathan said. But you're the only person in this house who showed real integrity. And I won't forget that. The conversation between Jonathan and Clarissa happened the next morning. Mara wasn't there to witness it, but Clarissa called her that afternoon, sobbing so hard she could barely speak. He knew, she gasped. The whole time, it was all a test, and I failed. Mara didn't know what to say. Part of her felt sorry for Clarissa. Part of her felt angry. Why didn't you just talk to him? Mara asked. Why did you make the videos? Because I was hurt, Clarissa screamed. Because for once in our marriage, I wanted him to feel what I felt. I wanted him to know what it's like to be betrayed. But even as she said it, her voice faltered. He said he's filing for divorce. He said I proved I never loved him. He said I cared more about being right than about our marriage. She was quiet for a moment. Mara, was I wrong? Did I ruin everything? Mara thought about her answer carefully. I think you were both wrong, she said finally. He shouldn't have tested you, and you shouldn't have gone public. You should have trusted each other enough to have a conversation. But you didn't, and now it's too late. Clarissa hung up without saying goodbye. Mara never spoke to her again. 2 months later, the divorce was finalized quietly. Clarissa received a settlement much larger than the fake will had promised, but it came with a non-disclosure agreement and a clause prohibiting her from speaking publicly about Jonathan or their marriage. She deleted her social media accounts. She moved to California, and slowly, she disappeared from the public eye. Jonathan asked Mara to stay on, not as a housekeeper but as his household manager. He doubled her salary and offered to pay for Kwame's private school tuition. You could have betrayed me, he told her. You had every reason to. I put you in an impossible position. But you didn't. You stayed honest. That's rare. Mara accepted. Not because of the money, though it helped, but because she'd seen something in Jonathan that day in his study. Beneath the tests and the paranoia and the walls he'd built around himself, there was a man who was desperately, achingly lonely. A man who wanted to trust people but didn't know how. Over the following months, something unexpected happened. Jonathan started talking to her. Not about business, not about money, but about real things. His childhood, his fears, his regrets. He told her about the brother who'd sued him and how it broke his heart. He told her about the friends he'd lost to greed and how it made him feel like he could never let anyone close. The test wasn't about the money, he admitted one evening. They were sitting in the kitchen, drinking tea after Mara had finished preparing his dinner. It was about knowing if someone could love me without wanting something from me. I thought if Clarissa passed, I'd finally feel safe. But she didn't, and now I don't know if anyone ever will. Mara set down her cup. Mr. Hale, you can't test your way into trust. Trust is a choice. It's risk. You have to give it before you get it. He looked at her for a long moment. Is that what you did with me? Yes, she said simply. I chose to believe you were a good man who'd made a mistake, and I chose to stay. 6 months later, Jonathan established a scholarship fund in Kwame's name. Not for Kwame specifically, but for children of single parents who'd immigrated to the United States. He funded it with $10 million. When Mara tried to thank him, he waved her off. You gave me something more valuable than money, he said. You showed me what real loyalty looks like. This is the least I can do. The house felt different now. Quieter, but not sad. Jonathan worked less. He started taking walks in the garden. He called his sister, the one family member who'd never asked him for anything, and apologized for the years he'd pushed her away. He didn't date. He didn't remarry. But slowly, carefully, he started letting people in. And Mara? She stayed. Not because she had to, but because she'd found something unexpected in that enormous, lonely house. She'd found purpose. She'd found respect. And in Jonathan, she'd found a broken man who was finally learning how to heal. The test had destroyed his marriage. But in its aftermath, it revealed a truth Jonathan had needed to learn. Loyalty can't be demanded or measured, can only be given freely. And when it is, it's worth more than all the money in the world. So let me ask you something. If you'd been in Mara's position, what would you have done? Would you have told Jonathan about the document the moment you found it? Would you have protected Clarissa's confidence? Would you have walked away entirely? And what about Jonathan's test? Do you think he was justified in testing his wife's loyalty? Or did his lack of trust destroy something that could have been saved? Here's the thing about loyalty. It's not about passing tests. It's not about proving yourself. It's about choosing to be honest even when it's hard. It's about staying true to your values even when no one is watching. Mara didn't pass Jonathan's test because she was trying to. She passed because that's who she was. And in the end, that's the only kind of loyalty that matters. The kind that comes from character, not calculation. If this story made you think, if it made you feel something, let us know in the comments. Share your thoughts, and subscribe so you never miss another story that makes you see the world differently. Because these stories, the real ones, the messy ones, the ones that don't have perfect endings, these are the stories that remind us what it means to be human.